Okay, well, I think that we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Recent Changes to BIA ICWA Reporting for Tribal Child Welfare Programs, hosted by Handle Information Technologies. My name is Katie Hubbard, and I am the Digital Marketing Coordinator here at Handle IT. I will be helping facilitate today's webinar alongside our presenter, Kolby Fenster. A little bit about Kolby. He is our head of customer relations here at Handle IT, where he oversees right track implementations and customer relationships. With more than a decade of experience working with social service programs and courts, he has helped dozens of tribes implement solutions ranging from out-of-the-box systems to complex multi-department platforms. In his free time, he is dedicated to cheering on the University of Wyoming Cowboys and Cowgirls, go Pokes, staying active, and spending time playing Frisbee with his wife and his dog. As for what to expect from today's webinar, Kolby will walk through the latest changes made to the BIA quarterly and annual reports, explain what those updates mean for tribal child welfare programs, and share practical strategies for simplifying the reporting process. He'll also discuss the benefits of using a case management software system, including reducing duplicate data entry, improving data integrity, strengthening collaboration and communication, and enhancing reporting and analytics. Today's session will be recorded, and everyone who registered will receive a recording in their inbox tomorrow to rewatch or to share with anyone who was unable to attend today. If you have any questions, presentation, please submit them using either the chat or the Q&A panel, and we've saved some time at the end of the session to answer as many as we can. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Kolby, to get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for attending. As Katie mentioned, today we'll just be going over changes to the BIA ICWA quarterly and annual report, how a case management system can hopefully help. I know several in attendance may also be an existing Right Track client. We've updated and added some new standard functionality to our ICWA module. So as a part of today's webinar, we're also going to be highlighting some of these improvements and changes that you should see in your systems over the coming weeks. And then really, ultimately, by the end of this, I hope people gain a little bit more confidence in what is being asked to track, collect, and report on for this report. There is a lot. I know it's probably very frustrating and not the most fun report to have to look at filling out or compiling. And yeah, hopefully we'll get through it together. One other thing I'll make note of real quick, I am working remote today, so if you hear a dog barking in the background or a squeaky toy, I apologize in advance. It's easier to have the dog with the door open than the door shut because he makes the same amount of noise regardless. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into what the BIA report actually is. So the BIA ICWA quarterly and annual report is required by all tribes and grantees receiving funding from the BIA. There are two sections of this report, a Part A and a Part B. Part A is called the ICWA Quarterly and Annual Report, and it primarily focuses on child abuse, ICWA child, let me rephrase that. It's primarily focused on ICWA notices, and Part B is primarily focused on child abuse and neglect referrals that you receive. A version of this report previously expired at the end of 2024, but I don't think a new version was actually released until earlier this year. And the new version of this report is not set to expire until the end of 2028. As a part of these changes to this report, Part A and B used to be in the same file. They're now two separate files that you can download and fill out. These links right here on the slide below will take you to where you can see the report and download them yourself. This is what the page should look like, and you'll see you have Part A right here and Part B down below. With that, we'll go ahead and jump into reviewing some of the changes for this, and I will go ahead and say or reiterate, I totally understand that this report asks for a lot. And so you are not alone if you feel frustrated of what this report is asking from you for you to collect in regards to your program. There's not really anything easy about the report, but again, hopefully we can make it a little bit seem less overwhelming by the end of this webinar, or give you some ideas on how you can make the data tracking and reporting parts easier. I will also say we're not technically affiliated with the BIA or anything like that, so some of these report questions and definitions, I would say, are open to interpretation. So I'm going to do my best to highlight those of where I see, hey, you could probably answer this one or two ways. And I may say, please contact your BIA representative if you have further questions or are unsure exactly of what the report is asking. So I'll go ahead and adjust these. I guess starting with part A, we're going to actually define what a ICWA notice is, or an ICWA notification. This definition is pulled from the BIA's website, and they define an ICWA notice as a notice issued when an involuntary child custody proceeding involves an Indian child. They should be required anytime an involuntary foster care placement occurs or a termination of parental rights proceeding occurs. They define an Indian child as any unmarried person under the age of 18 who is either a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe or the biological child of a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe and is eligible for membership in a federally recognized Indian tribe. Notices should include information about the child, parents, grandparents, any other direct lineal ancestors, court proceeding documents, and if one has been scheduled, the date, time, and location of any upcoming court proceedings or hearings. So again, this is all just pulled from the BIA's website on what they determine or define as an ICWA notice. And so we're going to kind of use this definition going forward for part A of the report. So when we first look at the updated version, we'll see the updated version on the right-hand side here and the older or previous version on the left-hand side. There doesn't appear to be too many changes. There are a few when you go to look at them, and we'll go ahead and move to the next slide that shows these. First change that I would say is actually pretty significant is you no longer need an overall total for the number of notices that were acted on. You just need totals for each type of activity that the tribe participated in. We also had question 9, B9 removed, the transferred to tribal court and cases managed by the tribe. That is no longer being asked for. I'm guessing it was seen as a repeat of question B3, which was how many notices ended up being transferred to tribal court. We also lost the placement funding source section. That is no longer required on the report. And then one other kind of change is question B8 has now been split into two questions. They want to know how many services were provided to keep a child in home that were provided by the tribe. And then they also want to know how many services were provided by the state. So that question has now been broken out, and they are H and I respectively. Otherwise, everything else has relatively remained the same. They did update some of the verbiage used in some of the questions and some of the definitions, which we'll kind of highlight or go over now. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the first question being asked, which is the total number of ICWA notices received by registered and certified mail. And they want the total number of children that are on these notices. So I just wanted to kind of highlight real quick that they do indicate a child can only be counted once in each quarter unless that child has a court proceeding that is open, closed, and reopened again in the same quarter. So hopefully that's kind of a rare instance, but for the most part, you again should only be counting a child once per quarter unless they meet these very specific conditions. Then in terms of the ICWA activities, they did keep the state hearings attended verbiage pretty much the exact same as the previous version of the report. They also had changed the verbiage or wording on, I think the previous report said like total number of case plans created or something along those lines. That's been adjusted, or I think it was case planning is what they said. That has been updated to specifically say total number of case plan meetings attended. And this just kind of explains what a case plan meeting can be. They provide some examples of that can be in person or phone calls. And that's where you're either meeting with the entire family or specific individuals. And so you'll just want to make sure you're tracking each time you have contact with a client because that will probably count as a case plan meeting. For question C, there weren't really any changes to the definitions of transferred to tribal court cases. And then for section D here, they did update and expand some of the placement types. So this used to just say child placed with relative. They've now clearly defined that to also include kinship. One thing I also want to highlight here and just remind everyone, they do want to know the number of new and ongoing placements that occurred during the quarter. I think maybe a previous or two previous versions, they only wanted to know two or new placements that occurred during the quarter. And I just want to reiterate, it's new and ongoing. They also allow you to count a child more than once in this section. So if a child transfers placements, either by type or even between different relatives, that is totally fine. And you'll want to make sure you count the child under each placement. The rest of these then also apply for sections E through G over here on the right-hand side. It's just a different placement type that the report is looking at. Now, for the last couple of questions then, we're going to talk about the child remains in home and those services being provided by the tribe. This was always a question that kind of confused me because when you first look at this, that's not necessarily what I think is being asked for. And then when they talk about actions and to keep the child at home, that can make it even sometimes more confusing. But they did clear up the definition a little bit more to distinguish that these should be number of children who were provided services to stay with their parents. And they include a couple of examples of these services ranging from parenting classes, transportation assistance, food assistance, etc. One thing to note on these, and this is just for how you would want to track those inside of your department, they technically want to know the number of children who were provided with the service, but some of their examples almost indicate that the parent would be the recipient of the service, right? So helping a parent find a ride, I interpret that as, well, where the parent is the one receiving the service, but we'd need to credit that to each child involved in a notice or a case. So that's where it can get a little tricky when it comes to reporting on these. So I would just make sure you either have some sort of way internally or your case management system still allows you to track a service was provided to a child, or you have a way to indicate that a child was provided to a parent on behalf of a child or children. That way, again, because this is asking for the number of services provided to the child, that's who you'd want to direct the service to. This is probably going to be a section where you're going to run into a lot of repetitive data entry or data tracking, just because a service that applies to a parent may, then be counted under all children on the case. And so you'll just want to reiterate make sure you have a way to track that data multiple times. And I guess if you're working with your staff, just understand that, you might be entering the same data a lot. It's just going to be changing who the service recipient was. And then lastly, question 6 here for the number of non-tribal ICWA notices received. I just want to highlight and make sure everyone understands they should be reporting on those. A few of my clients that I've worked with have really struggled to track this information just because they get overwhelmed with the number of notices they receive and they decide, hey, I only want to enter the ones that are actually related to tribal members. If you're doing that, you're doing a disservice to yourself by underreporting your numbers. I know that can end up being a majority of your referrals or notices that you receive, but just want to remind everyone that that is asked for on the report, and you should be having a way to document notices that are regarding non-tribal members or non-Indian childs. With that, that is kind of it for the changes and updates to section A of the, or part A, I should say, of the quarterly and annual report, at least when it comes to data. They decided to, I'd say, shock or, I don't know, add this. I don't know who thought it was a good idea, but we have 10 new narrative questions that are also on this report now that are going to be asked to filled out or be filled out each quarter. I was on the report itself. It tries to justify these narrative questions by saying, the goal is to help you tell the story of your program and the numbers you reported. There's a lot, so I was trying to find a positive of it. Maybe it will help you identify some changes and improvements internally to better serve your program and your program's clients while writing some of these things out. but I totally understand the, again, frustration for some of these narrative questions. With that, some of these questions aren't even just narrative questions. They also want you to incorporate numbers in, report on certain things inside of them. It's question 2, question 5, and question 7. So just want to highlight those real quick for everyone that you also have more data you need to collect for those. So we'll go over all those 10 questions right now, and that's going to be on this slide. So this right here is the first 5 questions. Some of these are more, again, just about things that are happening within your program and different activities that you're doing, different success stories you can share, how your program functions and works. But as I mentioned on the previous slide, question 2 here regarding child placement narratives, they want you to know the number of tribal foster homes licensed this quarter, as well as provide the number of relative or kinship homes the tribe has this quarter. One thing that isn't super clear on these, and they don't have any additional definitions for these, is I don't know if that means you should only count the number of newly licensed like foster homes in a quarter, or if it's any foster homes that were licensed at any point during that quarter. So kind of that whole new versus ongoing debate that we ran into with placements. I'd want to lean forward and say, hey, it should just be any new or ongoing foster homes that were licensed that quarter. But there's not any clear-cut definition, at least from what I could determine. So just as a heads up, this is a section where you could probably answer this 1 or 2 different ways. Then you also, in question 5 here, need to make sure you have a way to track the number of caseworkers that you have during a quarter, as well as your client to staff ratio. So that will just be making sure you have a way to track your total number of clients served, and then taking that and dividing it by your staff. So just make sure that that is another thing you are aware of, or you will need to report on, even though it's in the narrative section. For the last 5 questions, again, it's very similar to those first 5, where it's asking again more about things that happened in your program or specific cases, except for question 7 and question 10. So question 7, you're going to see here it says compile the data relating to the number and types of child abuse and neglect cases seen. They want to know those involving or appearing to involve alcohol and substance abuse, cases that were reoccurring, and cases that involve minor siblings. The one benefit of this, these 3 questions are asked also on Part B. So if you fill out Part B of this report, you can hopefully get those numbers and then fill out question 7 or the narrative using that data in Part B. So, and then lastly, they at least gave everyone a spot to provide feedback on this report. So hopefully everyone can take advantage of that and provide some updates on how we can improve, or how the BIA can improve this report going forward. Because yeah, there's a lot here. I know programs and supervisors and directors are very busy. And so not only to expect to be tracking all this information throughout a quarter, being able to then populate a report is going to take a lot of time. So, but that is it for the main changes to Part A. And now we'll shift over to Part B. So Part B, again, is going to focus on the child abuse and neglect referrals that were received during a quarter. For this Part B changes and updates, you have several data points that have been rearranged in the report. So they're still being asked, they're just kind of in a new section. We also saw some new data elements being added, as well as some expanded and updated verbiage to hopefully help track or indicate what we need to report on. And then I guess at least compared to Part A, there is no narrative section. So that is one, I guess, benefit. So we'll jump to Part B now. And when you do the side-by-side comparison, you are probably going to see it looks like there is a lot more in between the older version, which is here on the left-hand side, and the newer version that you see on the right-hand side. The main reason it seems like it's so much more is because of these 2 brand new sections here, where it wants you to track case plan goals and the number of case plans that were developed during a reporting period, as well as we now have a section for tracking why a child exited from foster care. So just wanted to highlight that that's kind of the reason it seems like it's so much more to start, but otherwise there hasn't been a whole lot changed with Part B either. To specifically go over some of these changes though, we'll kind of focus on that rearranging. So you can see here, the new report or the new version has question 8, and it wants to know how many referrals you received, reoccurring cases, and cases of siblings involved. So just like I mentioned in part A on that question 7 with the narrative, this is hopefully where you can get that information for part B and then use it to answer the narrative in part A. Then moving down then, question 9, where we talk about the types of child abuse and neglect referrals or the reasons for the referral. They did end up removing some of these. So psychological abuse and verbal abuse are no longer required to be tracked, as well as human trafficking. In their place, they have added a couple of new options, such as child harmed emotionally, child born drug affected / involved, opioids involved, and then a parent who cares for child is in jail and the home is not safe or available for the child to live in. Also on this slide, they did remove how many petitions to a tribal court. That is no longer required on Part B as well. Then to question 10, this is where, again, we kind of see those substantiated and unsubstantiated cases. Those have been moved over to the investigation outcomes section of essentially how many had court involvement, how many cases were closed because no action was taken, and then just like Part A as well, how many children were provided services to remain in the home. So I know at least when you look at here, that may not seem to match the exact question in Part A, but if you look at the definition, it does, and it just doesn't require that separation between state or tribal services. They just want it under one. And then we no longer need to track how many pending or open cases at the end of the reporting period that you had. Okay, and then from that should, and then lastly, for question 11 here, it talks about placement data. This is just like what we saw in the previous version. Again, just some of the definitions or labels have changed, but the main content of different placement types will be needed in the new version as well. So we're going to now look at some of the updated definitions and verbiage behind this report, just to make sure everyone can kind of understand hopefully what is being asked and just see what the definitions are. So for part 8 here, where we're going to talk about the number of child abuse and neglect referrals that you received. Again, it doesn't distinguish that these need to be only investigations or referrals that a child was found to be tribal. It wants all referrals. So again, just for data reporting and data collection purposes, I know it can be a hassle to collect those non-tribal referrals, but we need to make sure that those are being entered or reported on. Again, otherwise you're kind of hurting yourself by underreporting your numbers. One thing to note as well, they do only want a child to be counted once in this. So if they had multiple referrals during the reporting period, you'd only want to count them once up here in Part A. At least it gets a little tricky because they talk about like if a number of children, but then they use up here number of child and abuse and neglect cases. But they kind of say right here, do not count the same child more than once in this section. So if a child does have multiple referrals, they want you to report them under reoccurring cases, which is section B. One thing to note, at least on this section, they don't indicate that those referrals also have to happen in the same quarter. This is another one of those, I'm not sure based off interpretation if it should just be those that had multiple referrals in the same quarter, or if, let's say I had a family that I was working with and they had a referral from January of 2021 and we have another referral in June of 2026. Is that technically a reoccurring case because they did have a previous referral, just it was several years in the past? Not super clear on that. I always took it as we should still count them as a reoccurring case because they've had another referral, but I can see the argument for either way. And then lastly, for cases of siblings involved, that's just making sure if you have a case with multiple children involved or a referral with multiple children involved, that you are tracking that as well. And then you can see here, it does say you can technically count the same child more than once in this section. But yeah, that's just where, again, some of this definitions and reporting verbiage gets tricky. Some cases you can count a child more than once, others you cannot. But that at least is for part A, or question A, or of part B. Sorry, question 8 of part B. And now we'll move on to questions 9 and 10. And this is going to be where we talk, or sorry, I'm all messed up. Now we're going to be looking at the investigation outcome section. And sorry, real quick, I accidentally skipped a slide. Oh, sorry. Let me check. I was looking at the wrong one. My apologies. So yeah, this bottom question 9 here, where we talk about the types of child abuse and neglect, that is something where you can count the child more than once in this section. So just an example of that is, let's say a child has a referral come in and they were physically abused and there was methamphetamine involved. You'll want to make sure that you count the child once under this abuse type and then once under this reason for referral as well. It wasn't super clear if, let's say, a child had multiple referrals come in and they were both for physical abuse, if you count that child as twice in this section as well. Just because it does say you can count the child more than once, I'd say that's okay, but I might just double check on that. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight on this section is pertaining to sections E and then F, and then these subcategories. I put subcategories in quotes because they're not technically subcategories, they're just other drug types that they want you to report on. So when it comes to F here, you'll see it only wants you to mark somebody under this section if they do not fall in under one of the drugs listed below. So if somebody, let's say, had a referral come in involving meth and marijuana, you would want to count them once under drugs and or inhalants involved by the parent, since that marijuana is not listed here. And then you'd also want to count them once under methamphetamine involved, since that is a specific drug type listed. So that's, again, one of those where it can get tricky when it comes to reporting the types of a child abuse and neglect, but just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that if it's one of the listed drugs, you don't put them under F. If it is one of the, if it is one of the listed drugs, you don't put them under F. If it's not listed below, then you want to report that under F. And then alcohol is question E. So with that, then we'll jump to the next few questions, which are the investigation outcomes and more about the placement information. So again, these just kind of talk about for how many cases had their results substantiated versus unsubstantiated and wanting to track those outcomes. In terms of the child remains in home, just like I mentioned on the earlier slide, this definition does pretty much, or seems to match what was in Part A when it comes to those family preservation preservation services. They provide those exact same examples of, parenting classes, transportation assistance, housing assistance, etc. We just don't have that distinguishment of who provided the service. And then again, in regards to placement, pretty much an exact copy of Part A in terms of what the definition is. And again, they also want to know the number of new and ongoing children placed at any point during the quarter. And again, you can count the child more than once. So at least for some of these data elements, once you get them in Part A, hopefully you can kind of copy them over to Part B, as there's not really, at least from my opinion, too much of a difference between the two. Then jumping into the new sections here, where we talk about case plan goals and exiting for foster care. This is something I just kind of want to highlight here. So they say a child can be counted more than once if their case plan goal changes. So if they have a case plan for, say, reunification with their parent, and then that gets modified to, say, living with another relative, you'll want to count them under each section. Otherwise, Part A also wants to know the total number of cases the tribe or BIA agency developed case plans for. So this is another one of those where I'm not quite sure on how they'd want you to handle these specific definitions. In my personal experience with working with some of my clients, every tribe kind of does case plans a little bit differently. Some tribes do case plans for each parent. So in this instance, even though you're creating 2 case plans, one for mom and one for dad, I still think they would just say that's one case that you're creating a case plan for. Other clients of mine create case plans for the entire family. It's just one case plan that everyone's on. And then I also have a few clients that create case plans for the children. So again, if you're creating case plans for the children, I think at least part A, since it still just says number of cases, that would be one, but that's, again, kind of open to interpretation. Otherwise, though, you would have your children and their case plan goal, and you just want to make sure you have a way to report those goals specific to what they are asking for on the report. We also have a section for missing case plan goals. That one I could imagine might be a little tricky to, I guess, know if a child is missing a case plan. So I just want to kind of highlight there that if maybe you received a referral near to the end of the reporting period and, things had happened, but you just hadn't had time to develop a case plan, you'll want to make sure you mark those under the missing case plan goal section. And again, that's just kind of a weird one though, where it's you're not going to really maybe know if they don't have a goal, but if you have a case management system, hopefully they have a way of alerting you or tracking that. And then for the exits from foster care, this brand new section that is being added, I just want to explain that this says the child should not count more than once in this section. So if a child moves between placement types, they should not technically have an exit reason. It should only be their final reason why they're exiting. And so that's just something to keep in mind of. It's not going to be something that's on every time a placement ends, just when the child's, I guess, is on their final placement or is no longer being placed. And they have their several reasons here listed why, and some definitions of what each of these categories are. So that is a lot, again, as I kind of mentioned a few times, totally understand if there's some frustration regarding both parts A and part B's of this report. There's a lot of data being asked for ICW programs to collect, and that's hopefully where a case management system can help. It still won't necessarily be easy, as we still need the data entered into the system, but they can hopefully make it a little bit easier. For any of our existing clients that have RightTrack, or if you are a tribe with a case management system already in place, the next few minutes might be a little bit repetitive in terms of information you're already aware of or know about, but hopefully you can attest for it or even just kind of understand that, yeah, you may have ran into similar challenges and, maybe you'll pick up some ideas to even improve your case management system that you're currently using. After that, we will be going into the demo, though, of some of that new functionality that has been added to RightTrack. So what is a case management system then? It's essentially a system designed to store and track information. At the basic level, that could be something as simple as an Excel sheet where you have a record for each client that you're meeting with and reviewing, to a fancy software system that has more in-depth and detailed tracking. The goal of why you'd want to implement a case management system are usually 4 reasons that I like to highlight. You want to reduce your data redundancy, you want to improve your data integrity, you want to increase collaboration between departments or even inside your department, and then you want to improve reporting and analytics. We'll go into more of what each of these are in a second, but that's kind of the goal of why you should have a system or what you should hope to get out of a system. So when it comes to data redundancy, I always talk about limiting the amount of data that must be tracked and stored and gathered when you're interacting with a client or a family repeatedly. So for example, I moved last year, had to find a new dentist, doctor, all of that fun stuff after using the same people for 10 plus years. When I went in the very first time, I had to fill out their new client application, and it took me like 15 to 20 minutes to get checked in. So, even though my appointment was at 10, I didn't actually get to see my dentist until like 10:30 because I was filling out paperwork. But the second time I went in, they had all my information on file in their system. All they had me do was review it and make sure nothing had changed. And then I was checked in less than 30 seconds. So same sort of idea with case management systems here. If you are working or receive multiple referrals for a family, that initial data entry you're going to have to do is going to seem time consuming and a lot. But if you interact that family again in the future, that amount of time you're having to spend getting them set up in the system should decrease significantly because you already have a majority of that information. And besides like contact information, hopefully nothing really else has changed. This is also kind of important because the BIA asks for the number of reoccurring cases on both Parts A and Part B. And so, I understand that's probably a common problem that a lot of ICW programs run into is you may see a family several times, unfortunately, over the span of a few years. In terms of data integrity, this is going to be ensuring your data is clean and accurate and trustworthy to review and analyze. We have a saying that your data is only as good as what is entered. So that's just something to consider with the case management system as well. But a system can help enforce validation in real time to prevent mistakes, something that we often see in the past, especially when we are looking at Excel sheets that clients are currently using or previously using. You'll have a column called date of birth, and you'll find text in there, or you'll find phone numbers, or you'll find somebody's email address. Data essentially belonging where it shouldn't be, and a system can help prevent that information from being entered incorrectly or messing up your data. And so that's one of those things too, especially like a date of birth in the future. We run into a lot of times clients are in a hurry, they're filling out an application or entering in a notice that they receive. Somebody might be born in, say, 2006, and they just type in 2026 on accident, and a system could check and say, hey, this date of birth is in the future. Are you sure this is the right one? If it's not, that warns the user, and they can correct it in real time instead of having to fix it at the end of a quarter when it's a mad rush to get all of the reporting data compiled and ready to be presented or reported to an agency or grant. With data integrity, there's another option on that as well, and that is also requiring staff to select values that are required for reporting purposes. We run into this a lot with clients that are using Excel sheets, and while I know some Excel sheets have the ability to lock down values in a column, most of them I see are free text, and so then when you ask for a staff member to fill out the placement type, once you go to query or analyze all of your data, this is what your placement type ends up looking like. You have your types that you're expecting to see of relative/kinship. You'd have your group living center, but then you have staff accidentally entering things like grandma, or you have somebody just typing in relative, not relative/kinship, or somebody decided to abbreviate it to just R/K. And different things like that. So a system, when you can kind of force users to pick things that are required from your grant or from a pre-approved list, that kind of cuts down on those data entry mistakes that you have to make correct or worry about filling out at the end of a reporting period. And again, not that people are doing these things on purposefully by any means, but it's one of those, it can save some confusion and frustration long term. And that's really important when we not only see those placement types on the BIA report, we see a lot of that on the types of abuse and the reasons for the referral. There are many reasons why somebody could get a referral in, and that's great and everything. We can always have an other option, but for the grant reporting purposes, we really need to work on consolidating that reason into one that's required on the BIA report. From data integrity, now we're going to kind of talk about that communication and collaboration aspect. So this is something that can be a little scary when you first talk with ICW programs about, just because of how important your guys' data is to be confidential and kept within your program. And so sometimes when you say, yeah, all the information is visible and in a centralized location, that can, trigger some warning bells or red flags to program supervisors and directors. And totally understand, but hopefully long-term that should be a good thing. Security can always be implemented to restrict users from seeing content they shouldn't. And so, at least from a director or a manager level, if you need to look up a caseworker's information and, you just have everything on paper, you have to go to their office, dig through their filing cabinet. Hopefully they didn't move it and place it on a desk or somewhere else. If you have a system where all that information is stored, you look up the client's name, all the information is visible to you. So it can always be easily accessed and instantly reviewed, but instead of having to wait on somebody to come back from being in office or hunt down a filing cabinet key or anything along those lines. If you take it one step further and actually have a centralized system across multiple departments, That's where you can also see some benefits from cross-department collaboration and communication. Again, security can be in place to restrict those to only seeing what is relevant to their program or department, but something we actually see quite common with some of our tribes that we work with. An example is an enrollment and an ICW department sharing the same system. Enrollment has access to the enrollment information, ICW has access to the ICW information, and they may share data between the two with things just like name and date of birth. And then that can be really advantageous to the ICW staff, because if they need to determine if somebody's enrolled or not, we'll do like a calculated field that just says enrolled or not enrolled. So instead of having to call the enrollment office and provide a name and look up a family tree to find relatives or anything like that, the caseworker can just see that information in their system. So that's one of those benefits where if you can even expand it across multiple departments, that it can be very helpful. And then lastly, reporting, which is what I like to nerd out about and get excited over. The data in your system, it's in there. You're spending all of this time and hours to enter it. Let's use the system to get the data out. So an example of that is having a system generate that BIA quarterly and annual report for you. You spend all the time entering the data in the system. It should hopefully be available to you at the touch of a button to analyze and compartmentalize it to a specific quarter or the correct quarter for you. You can also use reporting for things that aren't just statistical reports, which is something a lot of people sometimes think about when they hear the word report. But you can also have reports for all levels of staff. So maybe that's a caseload report to help clients easily access the cases they're assigned to. If you have any forms or letters that you send out to your clients at the result of once an investigation has concluded, that is information that is in the system, such as name and contact info and the outcome. That maybe there's a way your system can auto-generate those lessons or those letters for you. Generate family tree printouts to provide, relatives for possible placement. Those are all other types of reports that a system could have that aren't necessarily statistic reports. And so that's something that you can hopefully take advantage of with a case management system. Now, with that, you can't just implement a case management system and expect everything to just work without any struggles or frustration. They're very useful and powerful, kind of like the Spider-Man of with great power comes great responsibility. And they can come, when you go to implement a case management system, they come with their own challenges for departments and programs. So now we're just going to go over some things to consider when you're implementing a case management system and how you can make this transition a little bit easier and without as many hiccups or road bumps for your staff. The most important one, or the one that I run into most common with the clients that I work with, is getting buy-in from your staff. And so most of your staff are going to be the ones doing the data entry. And so they aren't really going to care if you talk about data redundancy and data integrity and all of that. Or when I say, hey, yeah, you're going to enter all this and it generates this BIA quarterly and annual report, they look at me and go, what do I care? I'm not doing that. That's not my responsibility. So it's really hard for them to understand, why it's so important for them to enter the data into the system. And especially if they don't have a process right now where they're doing data entry, it all of a sudden seems like a very complicated and complex task that they're now being asked to do. And, I'll get the question all the time of, why do I have to waste the time entering this data? I should be spending this time helping my clients, which is a very reasonable thing to say. It's just that idea, though, of if you take the 20 minutes right now or 10 minutes to enter in a notice and, use it to track their case information and, store all your notes in it going forward, we're going to be able to use that data to either get more grant funding or provide better services to that client in the future. So, kind of seeing the forest for the trees, they may be focused more short term, and a case management system can help long term. You also are going to get those questions of, can't I just scan this referral in and the system enter everything for me? Without getting too much into the technical difficulties of that, I always just like to say, let me know if you figure out how to do that, and I will be your first investor. It's one of those things of, yeah, I would love if we could come up with a way, but it's a lot not as simple as it appears to be once you get into the weeds of it. So just be aware of those things. You're probably going to get those types of comments when you go to implement one. And so to make that a little bit easier, these are kind of some tips that I would say can help prevent those or ease the pain of having to do data entry. So first, just including staff and getting their feedback when you're first reviewing systems. See if they have any pain points in their current day-to-day work that maybe the system can solve. And identify features that they want or are going to get them excited about the system. The other thing is embracing the data entry side as a director or a supervisor and learn with them. That's super important when you're doing your initial trainings with the system. And, if you can find the time even after you go live, see if you can enter a case or a client's information occasionally. And so that way you're alongside them for those hard parts. I've had a few unsuccessful projects where, a director or program manager has essentially been like, yep, use the system. Listen to Kolby. I don't care what he says. I just expect I click my button and I want the report to be done. And the staff hear that and go, nope, I'm not going to enter the data. And then the project becomes kind of a fail because, they don't see that hard work being put in from above. And so, if you can take that lead to, show them, hey, I'm not even above data entry. I'm the one doing it too with you. I understand it's not a fun thing. I'll just say it, there's not a fun way to do data entry. But, if you can convince your staff that, hey, it's beneficial and why it's beneficial, that can solve a lot of problems, which actually kind of leads me to my next point of hopefully sharing why or how you're using the data that they're entering in the system to improve the program or services being offered to clients. So, you may not, for the BIA grant report funding or BIA grant or ICWA report, maybe explain some things you've learned or why it's so important, or maybe you're able to pull internal statistics and say, hey, because of your data that you collected on the number of contacts you were having to do, we realized that we are way understaffed and you don't have enough time in the week to meet with all your clients. So we got more funding to hire more caseworkers. That way, they kind of see that it is beneficial with their to enter data into the system. And then lastly, this is kind of the unfun part of the case implementation of a case management system, but it's another crucial part, and that's running reports on a weekly or biweekly basis to ensure staff are entering in data in the system as it happens. It's kind of what I call the babysitting job, which is important to say at that kind of point. But it's one of those things where we even see with some of our clients, we go live with the training, they're using the system for the first couple of days, weekend happens, and then next week they don't log in. And so that's just where it's really critical as a director or a supervisor to make sure your staff are entering that data in the system in real time. Otherwise, if they're saving it to the end of the month or the end of a quarter, you're kind of, not getting any of the benefit of a case management system because you're only getting that information, at certain points of the year rather than at any time. And so if you're running reports on a weekly or biweekly basis, you can see if cases are getting entered, documents are getting entered, do your case plan meetings or your contacts counts go up, et cetera, and just ensure that staff are in the system. Otherwise, there's some other things to consider with case management systems, and that's just more of what you can get out of it. So kind of like what we talked about of those benefits of reporting and everything, some systems may say, hey, we can only do this grant or report, and that's great and everything. Obviously, that's a benefit, but is there more you can get out of the system in terms of that reporting? So just like I mentioned, there might be more than just statistical reports in the system. Those are things going to be like mailing letters, client lists, mailing labels, etc. Those are all things that, maybe other features in a system that you want to consider when you're looking between several options. And then lastly, another key one is tools to assist your caseworkers. Obviously, I spent all this time going over how important data entry is, and there are some things that can be done. If you have data like services that is going to be repetitive, are there ways to mass create records or copy records over and over? That way you're not having to click the same button, 10 times for 10 different kids. It's because that's very time consuming. Also, again, is there a very easy way for them to access their clients and the individuals that they work with? If it takes me over 30 seconds to pull up my caseload and access a client, as a caseworker, I'm probably not going to want to use the system. So just understand how easy it is or how quick it is for staff to access their clients and their information is going to be really helpful when it comes to analyzing case management systems. And then the last one I'll just say too, with that, please don't be shy when you're wanting to provide feedback and you need assistance with your staff for training. You know, most vendors should be readily available to assist with that type of stuff. That's something I always tell our project managers to tell the clients during training of, please don't be shy if there's something wrong with the system or something that's not quite right. Please let us know. I can't help you if I don't know about it. And, you know, it's just kind of getting over that shyness of, if I have a problem, do I tell the vendor or tell somebody about it? Please do. Otherwise, it's going to just continue to remain and not going to get fixed. You're going to get more frustrated. Your staff are going to get more frustrated. And then, you know, again, the case management system and all of its benefits are probably not going to be seen. Now, with that, we're going to kind of transition to highlighting some new right track functionality. So if you're not a right track client, this may be a little, what the heck are you showing me? But hopefully if you are an existing right track client, these will be things that get you and your staff excited. With all of these recent BIA reporting changes, we've kind of added some new functionality to our standard module to improve the data collection and also make it easier for staff to enter this data into the system. You may already have some of this functionality on your site. If you don't, please reach out to your project manager and they'll probably be reaching out to deploy it in the next couple of weeks. They'll also be more than happy to meet with you to do trainings with your staff on this new functionality. So I don't want you to feel like what you're seeing today is the last time you'll ever get it presented or reviewed again. And yeah, we'll just go over some of these new changes that you should start to see in your system. So we're going to go to a case record real quick that I created in the system, and I'm going to start with the notice information. So tracking notices that you received for Part A, that was something that we kind of were guessing with the referrals and then court cases and all of that. We've updated this functionality to include a few new fields. One is going to be this notice date field. So that way, instead of having to judge the start date or worry about the start date being the petition date versus when you received it, we now have a separate field to specifically track when you received notice of the case and then when the petition was actually originally filed. You'll also see we have a field here for if it was received by registered and certified mail. And then when we go to generate the report, we're essentially going to look at these data points to pull that information. You'll also notice right next to the notice date field, we've added a party field. So that way you can tie a court case that you enter into the system to the child that is involved with. And then, so this is what it would look like if I had a case involving multiple children. And this is where we also have one other button that should be new here to, again, assist with that data entry button or process. And that's going to be this copy case button. So between my clients, I've seen states and different jurisdictions do cases kind of two different ways. One is they do a case for the entire family, and that case number is consistent among all children. Since Part A of the report, though, wants to know each child listed on a notice, you're going to have to, kind of re-enter that case multiple times and link it to a different kid. So if that is the case, what we would just say for caseworkers is go in, create the case for one child, then they would just click on the copy button here and just change which case or which child is involved with the case, hit save, and then that record would be added to the system. So they don't even have to re-enter all this information, they just copy it. The other option that I've seen is each child gets their own case number, which essentially is pretty much the exact same thing. You're probably going to have the same case source, you're going to have the same case type, same court and all that. The case number, though, and the party that's involved is probably going to be the only thing that changed. And so in that situation, you can still take advantage of the copy button. You would just copy that. You would go in, change this from, say, 0942 to 0943. I'm going to pick the child involved with that case, hit save. And again, now that case has been entered into the system, and I don't have to re-enter so much similar information over and over again. For the case plan meetings, so that's kind of the big section on Part A and the notice data. Then we'll kind of go into case plan meetings and everything. This was an option we've had in the system for a while. We've just updated it to specifically track if it's case plan meetings. So this is the contacts object. And so we just have functionality here. This is where we would expect you to enter in your contacts with your family. And then we can pull and say, okay, any contacts that were entered, those were case plan meetings, and use that on the report. If you have contacts that you don't want to report on the thing, that is totally fine. We have some things on the back end that will allow an administrator to distinguish which contact types you want to report on versus which ones you don't. We've also then updated the placement object in the system. So this is where we track where all of the youth have been placed on a case. You'll want to make sure when we deploy new code to your system that your project manager updates your placement types to probably use the new verbiage on the BIA report. That way, if you have any questions or staff are confused on what they need to select, they match between the two and it makes it a little bit more consistent. And then you will also notice we've added a new exit reason field here. So that way for part B, when it wants to know why the child exited placement, you'll be able to select those reasons. Again, if a child is simply moving to a new placement, then there's not really going to be an exit reason that you report on, but we could still have a caseworker select that as an option of just move to new placement. Then, in terms of tracking services that were provided to the family to keep the child in home, this is something that we kind of had called active efforts, and we had a few people using it, but not to its fullest extent. And so we've kind of revamped it to be a place where you can track those family preservation services being provided to a child. We've updated it to include a date, time performed, and who the service was provided to. So this way you can track not only who performed the service, who is the recipient of it, and then we can look here to determine if the recipient was a child or not. And again, just as I kind of mentioned in the part A when we were talking about this, you may have the same service being provided to all children in a case or all children on a notice. And that's totally fine. Instead of having to spend time clicking on the add button though to add each service for each kid, right next to the add button up here, there's going to be a mass create button. So if all the children received counseling or all the children received housing assistance, you can click on this mass create button now. You'll fill out the generic information of, again, who provided the service, what service it was, and then you would scroll down here to indicate which parties were the recipient of that service. And again, then the system will automatically create those records for you, so staff are not having to enter the same data 4 or 5 different times. And then lastly, one of the next big changes then is actually going to be on our referral object. So this is where we track all of those child abuse and neglect referrals that are entered into the system. So we have the date and time of the referral, where it came from, and then the outcome. We've updated the investigation and finding logic in here, as well as the incidence logic, to hopefully make it a little bit more clear on what is being provided to your program. The first change is going to be adding a new object here called case record parties. This is essentially where you're going to add all of the children that were listed on a referral. We've seen a few times where a referral will come in for a family and there's, let's say, 4 kids involved. Only 2 of the children were actually receiving abuse though, so we needed a way to kind of separate those other 2 children out. You'll notice again here you can create and add each child manually, but to again assist with that data entry process, we added a mass create button here. So that way, if you have several children you need to add to a referral, you can just select them all here, hit save, and then they will be added to it all at once. Then jumping to the incident functionality, you will see that there is a new victim field here. So that way you can mark a incident to a specific victim. And again, if there is an incident where each child had different types of abuse, that is totally fine. In that situation, it still would probably be better then to manually add each of those incidents into the system. Otherwise, if those abuse types are consistent among children, or at least you want to have a good foundation, you will see that there is a copy incident button here. So if there's another child involved with this incident and they had the same types of alleged abuse or reason for the referral, Instead of having to re-add all of these by hand, I can click on the copy button. I'm just going to change our victim here to another child, hit save, and then the system will automatically create that referral incident for me with those exact same types of findings. So again, just some spots in here to assist with the data entry process for the referrals. Also, with this section, you will want to make sure you work with your project manager on updating the finding types with those new options that were highlighted in Part B. So just as a reminder here, or not for the types of abuse, sorry, not finding types, but types of abuse and reasons for the referral, you'll want to make sure your system gets updated with those new options, such as, emotional abuse and home is not safe, as well as for like the parent who cares for child is in jail. And then we would want to remove those options such as human trafficking and then psychological abuse and so on, because they are no longer needed on the report. If you'd like to keep those for internal reporting purposes, that is totally fine. You can work with your PM on how to still track those in the system, but how they will then fall under a specific category on the report or just not show up on the report. But that is one thing you'll want to just double check with your project manager, getting that these types get updated as well. And then the next thing then is just going to be on the case planning. So again, case planning here, I will say everyone does case plans a little bit differently from my experience. And so we do have the case plan object in here to track, case plans that are either created for a family or a particular parent or for a particular child. Inside of a case plan, we've had a goal section here where you can track which goals are associated with that case plan. And this is where we've added functionality now to specifically look at a goal type that will then tie into Part B of the report, where it wants to know how many children of a specific goal occurred during the reporting period. You'll also notice there is a copy button right here. So if you have the same goal for several children in a case, you can copy those goals among them. And again, that should hopefully speed up some of the data entry when it comes to entering this information. And then for the big changes, we've hopefully made generating the report itself a lot easier than what you are currently having to work with or experience. Our previous iteration of the report had all of the data, but it wasn't necessarily in the best format when it came to pulling it out of the system. You kind of had to look at it and pull it from different sections to know which category was displaying what. And we've since updated those reports to be a lot easier to understand and interpret. So when I go back to our Right Track home screen real quick, you should see two new reports in your system. You'll see a Part A and a Part B of your report. For Part A, you'll simply click on that, and this is what the new report layout's going to look like, where you'll see it's pretty much designed to match the exact layout that you see on the BIA quarterly and annual report. We have all of the data questions up here. And then because Right Track does store some of those narrative data points or data elements in the system, we've tried our best to include those down here as well. That way, again, you're not having to worry about, compiling or tracking some of those numbers elsewhere or in some other place. We will also be updating this to include breakout tables. So that way, if you have questions on how Right Track is getting these numbers, you'll be able to see that. But we wanted to focus on getting the updated layout first, and then those breakout tables will be added later. And so all you'll have to do to change your reporting period is change your parameters up here at the top to the specific quarter you're looking for, and then, Right Track should take care of the rest. Part B is pretty much going to work the exact same way in terms of its layout. And again, we'll be adding some breakout tables here. That way you don't have to try and guess or know how Right Track is coming up with its numbers. And instead, we'll be able to see that information directly on the report itself. So with that, again, we'll just remind, if you are an existing Right Track client and you're excited to see that, please reach out to your PM if you have any further questions or want to schedule trainings with your staff to go over some of this new functionality. We should be deploying it out either already or to your sites in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully those are some good changes that you're excited to see in the system. So with that, I'm going to do a quick slide then just on some more information about what Right Track is, and then just a few more announcements real quick before we open it to any questions. So for announcements, we have started to see more of our ICW programs receive funding for the Family First Preservation Services Act. This grant requires you to generate what's called an XML file and submit it to receive your funding, or continue to receive your funding. We have an add-on available, so if you're wanting to look at that as an opportunity for some additional funding, we have a module that adds a few new data elements, and then we'll spit out the correct file for you. We also have an AFCARS module for anyone interested in pursuing that as a tribe or a program. I think only 8 tribes across the country currently do AFCARS. I know there are several more in the application/approval process, but if that is an option as well, we do have an add-on for that. The AFCARS module is quite extensive and the reporting is quite complex on that. I don't even think they let you get the funding without a case management system that can do that for you. So if that is of interest, just know we will have that available as well. With that, I will open it to any questions that we may have in the chat or may have received from anyone.
Kolby, I don't think that we received any in the chat, but I did receive a few anonymously, and so I will read those out to you. Can RightTrack help with the new narrative questions or only the numerical sections?
It can help with the narrative questions, not all of them that are specifically like activities and different things like that, but for those that I highlighted of question 2, 5, and 7, we have some of those data elements in the system, and so we will put those on our BIA report to help you out. Yeah, to help you out, I should say.
Perfect. Can RightTrack actually generate the report in full, or does it just store the data?
So it will, I'll say that it does generate the report. You still need to take the data from the report and then insert it into the actual BIA report just because they have their specific formatting. And obviously the narrative questions we don't have text boxes for you to type those in, but the content itself should all be in there and you should be able to just take the numbers and transfer them over.
Perfect. And then can RightTrack generate the BIA report perfectly, or does staff still need to review it before submission?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, your data is only as good as you enter it. So while I'm very proud of what RightTrack can do and track, if staff are not entering the data, the report will not just magically put numbers in the system for you. So you will need to make sure staff are entering the data consistently. Those parameters up at the top that I showed, I highly recommend adjusting those on a, like I said, bi-weekly or weekly basis. So you can just kind of spot check throughout a week or even a month that your staff are entering things correctly. And then again, you can identify any problems in advance instead of those last 14 or 30 days where, you're trying to get the report submitted within the submission period.
Perfect. And then it looks like we have one more here. Can RightTrack prevent duplicate entries for the same child or family?
Yes. So when you go to create a record in RightTrack, we have a few duplication checks in the system. We look for like duplicate names, date of birth, social security numbers, if that's something you track as well. And the system will try and alert you if a staff member is creating a duplicate record. That's something we also really hit on training to make sure when staff are getting a new file or a new case that they look up that person's name. We have things available to make that super easy for them. If it comes back with no results, then you know, okay, I got a brand new client. If it does come back with the results, then you would just want to compare and make sure, yeah, the person on the notice or referral is the person in the system. If we do end up finding some duplicates in the system, that's also not the biggest deal. We have the ability to merge records through the system. We normally restrict that functionality to administrators or supervisors or directors. And they essentially just have to click a button, indicate which records they want to combine, and then the duplicate records get combined into one record. So.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that concludes our questions for now. If you guys have any more, please don't be afraid to reach out and ask after the webinar. But thank you, Kolby, for providing such great insight into the recent reporting changes and showing how helpful of a tool a case management solution can be for tribal child welfare programs. And thank you to our audience for attending today's session. We hope that you enjoyed your time, found it informative, and that you'll return for our future webinars. So be sure to keep keep an eye out in your inbox and on our social pages for more information about those. But I believe that's all from me. So unless you have anything else, Kolby, thank you everyone for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you everyone for attending. And again, totally understand if that report is frustrating, and you're not alone if you feel that way. And hopefully we can help, or you feel a little bit more confident in what is being asked. So thanks everyone.
Thanks.